Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week with not one, but two album reviews. Yeah, they both came out at the exact same time. They are both, I believe, progressive metal. This video we're going to be looking at Khôrada, but the other video that is out simultaneously, same time as this, is about a band called Hungry Lights. Interestingly, we're looking at the first album for both bands, although in this case with Khôrada, it's their only album. So, let's dive into this. We have 7 tracks, looking at an hour's worth of music. The album is called Salt. Let's dive in. See what's going on with the first track, Edeste. So a bit of a fast 3, but you can feel it in a slower 4 as well. Ooh. Really fun cymbal work. Solo trumpet in the background. I love the varying weights of the instruments. I mean, this guitar is massive compared to everything else. The drums are very expressive. Very fun ideas in there. It's interesting where you can still hear the triplet influence, primarily in the bass kick, but even some of the rhythms over here on the big guitar. Drummer really pushing against that 4/4. vocal harmonies are interesting. They remind me of early Godsmack, and I never figured out that interval. I told myself one day I need to go and figure out what that interval is. It's a specific dyad that I feel like they kind of moved away from after only a couple albums, but to me, like, it's a big defining element of Godsmack's first couple of albums. And they're using that same interval here for the vocal harmonies, or something close to it at least. It's not consistent, but there are certainly times in the melody that kind of hit that nostalgia for me. Is that a drone in the background, or just like white noise? Oh, that's just feedback, isn't it? Alright. Is this going to transition or fade? That would be a transition. Alright, I suppose I should back that up a little bit to ensure we get that full movement when we start the next track. This is wild, right? I'm still kind of processing the ending. I think I'm going to come back to that later. There's a lot of variety on this. Not, I think, compositionally, at least not in the grand scheme of things. I think the song, aside from the ending being so drastically different from everything else, but like the first 5 minutes or so, 5.5 minutes, they were pretty consistent with their atmosphere, the balancing of roles, what the bass does, what the guitars do, what the vocals and drums do. There really isn't a lot of variety there, although when you look at individual moments, I mean, the song's constantly doing new things. I think that's a pretty cool contrast. But I think what stands out to me more so than like a compositional side is like the production of different instruments. Like I mentioned, this left guitar is massive all of the time. It's not like, this section we just need a big guitar. It's like, no, this guitarist has chosen to go for a massive guitar tone. It's sort of to the detriment of everything else. It's overwhelmingly large. The other guitar, I think, can still be heard generally fine because of the difference in panning, sitting on the other side of the sound. The bass is punchy enough that it can be heard, and the drums have their own unique timbre. They have that percussiveness. It can cut through stuff, especially with the cymbals and the snare usually being a bit of a brighter, higher pitched tone than what the low end, meaty, bassy guitar is doing. So it has its own like little space carved out too. But the vocals, I mean, this vocalist likes to sing rather low in pitch and even in volume, it sounds like. There's also a lot of slurring of syllables going on, too. I don't even know if this is in English. That's how little I understood the words here. Even at the times when I could make out syllables a little clearer, I'm not sure I heard English words. So it'll be interesting to get into the lyrics and see what's happening there. But the vocals, I feel, get drowned out by this really big guitar over here. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I don't think it's too distracting either. It's just one thing that I noticed since, I'm really actively listening here. I'm looking for the details, and so I'm going to hear things that I don't think everyone else would. Again, I don't think it's distracting. I think generally it's fine, and I acclimated to it as the song went on, and I think that the volume leveling and mixing in that final section worked really well. And it seemed like the volume of the vocals wasn't changed at all there. So it may just be that the vocals are mixed at a level that is generally fine for every style of music that they're going to approach on this album, instead of manipulating it per section, which is, it's a choice. There's definitely a lot of ways to go about production. This one ends up being fine. I think I'm just going to need some time to acclimate to the vocals being a bit pushed into the mix. But it's interesting to hear all the different instruments the way that they're. Like I said, I mean, one guitar is massive, the other guitar is kind of small, narrow. It cuts through more so like a lead guitar tone, smaller and piercing, rather than like the post guitar tone. The other one, post metal guitar tone, is like large and fuzzy and unwieldy. One's like a sword, one's like a hammer, right? The bass is punchy though, right? It doesn't get drowned out with too much fuzz or muddiness, but it isn't as sharp and clear as the other guitar. It kind of sits in the middle of the two, which is interesting because it sits in the middle panning wise as well. The vocals, as I mentioned, are very slurry and low end and kind of lack definition as far as enunciation goes. They are kind of muddy in a way. And then the drums are crisp. Most albums tend to have a unification of sound to create a strong sonic identity between everything. This band's a bit of a mishmash of sounds, and I think that's very interesting. It ends up creating something that is unique. As soon as the song kicks in and I felt the imbalance of the two guitars, I was like, okay, you got my attention. This is not, something I've heard before. Unique little details like that, they can go a long way. I'm curious how other people feel about it, though, right? Because, like, casually, it's a little off-putting, right? I've had to adapt to it. Artistically, though, I think it's interesting. I think it's awesome. But, if you're just an average metalhead, what do you think of this? Right? As soon as this album kicked in, what were your thoughts on the balancing of everything, the variety of sounds? I just find the whole production to be quite intriguing. I'm curious if they're going to retain this going forward, if this is like the sound of the album, or if this was something to create the specific feeling of this track, which is really where I want to go next. I mentioned that the one guitar is a very post-metal sound. I kind of want to put this into that post-metal genre. A lot of this is about weight and emotion and atmosphere. Those aren't the only things, of course. I am going to go into individual instrumental ideas in a moment, but I think generally speaking, that's what this song says to me. It is dreary, it is heavy, it's a massive weight being placed down upon me as the listener here. It reminds me of post-metal in a lot of ways. I think I said post-rock just a second ago. I meant post-metal if I said rock. Even when we have instruments that are trying to push the momentum, push the complexity, try to do something beyond texture and atmosphere, they're never really the main feelings to the song. The vocals just sort of dragging their legs through these melodic lines, and that one super fuzzy guitar being this overbearing weight on everything. They dictate everything about this song. Everything else can fight as much as they want. They can put intricate guitar work in, or complex drum patterns. They always get sucked right back into that lethargic weight, though. No matter how much they try to push the song forward, they end up giving up and just falling in step with the rest of the instruments. It doesn't feel futile, though. I don't know. I think we'll have to explore more of the album and see where they take this. The end of the song presents something. Hope, I think, is kind of what I got out of the vocal melody. I mean, but with all the noise, the feedback going on behind it, even the trumpet feels dreary, as bright of a tone as it is, as welcome of a range of notes, it being a bit higher up in pitch than really anything else that we heard in the metal sections. I mean, its melody still feels drained. Also, it being pushed into the distance, forced into the background, just like when we heard the trumpet at the beginning of the song too. It's hopeful but not optimistic, right? I hope things change, but dude, I really it'd be like the 1% thing. And I don't know if y'all have noticed in this timeline, the 1% event never happens. We always get the terrible. We always take the road that takes us to that terrible 99% chance. We never get that lucky die roll into the good timeline. You know, that's kind of what the trumpet reminds me of there. An unoptimistic hopefulness, wanting things to be better, but not believing they can be. And for it to exist in that noise there at the end, yeah, I think it just cements that feeling home, right? It's not surrounded by beauty. It's not surrounded by angelic choirs. It's not surrounded by, just gorgeous classical chord composition and progression. It's not surrounded by bouncy, jazzy, funky stuff. It's surrounded by noise. No harmony, not consonant, not dissonant, just sounds, feedback. Dang. When I heard the ending, I didn't think it was that bad, but now that I'm starting to think through it and speak my thoughts, it's heavier than I remember. Or than I anticipated based on my first thoughts, I suppose. Now I mentioned that despite having this slow, heavy weights throughout most of it, if you break it down, you get to the smaller ideas, individual lines, you'll actually find a lot of cool things going on. The drummer in particular has some very neat melodic passages, some wild rhythmic ideas, playing around with the triplet feel that we have. Like I mentioned, the song, I would probably transpose it into that slow 4/4 that I had mentioned at the beginning, that 1 2 3 4. That tempo feels right for the feeling of the song, the weight that it evokes. But that 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, that within the 4, where every beat is subdivided into 3 equal ones, that's present everywhere. You can hear it in the thinner guitar line and some of the melodies and rhythms that they're playing. Not necessarily always playing the 1 2 3, but sometimes you might get 1 2 3 1 and kind of get a little bit of that burst from the back end of that 3 subdivision. The same thing can be heard in the bass kick. lots of that too. You're gonna pretty much always get like I don't remember if it was 1 and 3 or like 2 and 4, but the bass kick was giving us these very solid accented beats, kind of keeping the rhythm, but the syncopation in between wasn't based on eighth notes or 16th notes. It was based on those triplets. It was based on the three subdivision. And so like even when we don't have an instrument laying down that constant triplet feel, which we do occasionally, the hi-hat was frequently used, just that tut 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 tut, keeping that three pulse alive. But even if an instrument isn't leaning into that in like the most direct, overt way, you can hear the influence of the three pulse elsewhere. And I think that's pretty cool. It keeps the song feeling a bit light and dexterous at times, even even when it isn't going out of its way to create this faster heartbeat underneath the song. And sort of that duality is part of the battle here, right? The song is heavy, it's weighty, but it doesn't want to be. Like I mentioned, the instruments try to push it in different directions. The drummer has these fun offbeat accents where they'll just shift to only playing halfway point between beats. And the guitarist over here, the thinner guitarist will start the thinner guitar. I don't know the body shape of the musicians. The thinner guitar will start playing some faster, more dexterous lines rather than just sitting on a single note, playing something with a bit of flourish, but every time they get dragged back into that weight. And I think this is part of that too. Trying to keep things dexterous and light, and moving and grooving, bringing that syncopation in at times. And just like the instruments, this triplet feel gets locked in at times, and we lose it. We lose it to this slow pulse. But it is neat to hear the variety too. I mentioned about the large guitar just being brooding and fuzzy, but it actually has a few different lines in it too, and it does pick up the pace at times. It isn't just, play a chord and leave it hanging in the air. There's rhythmic elements to it. Sometimes it isn't just playing chords. Sometimes there's melodic ideas. Sometimes there's a proper riff to it. There's cool things going on there. The bass guitar, well, mostly just kind of laying down the foundational heaviness of the song, does have some nice bass licks to it. And like I mentioned, the drummer's all over the place. Honestly, there's so many times I'm like, dude, what are you doing? That drum pattern was bonkers. And it makes the song feel like it gets a burst of adrenaline, but again, only to get sucked right back into the dreariness. I'd say the vocals are the only instrument that don't have flourish to them until the end. Even that, I don't know if I'd call it flourish. It's just focusing on stronger melodic lines rather than being that slurry texture that's added to the mix through the majority of the middle of this song. I am curious then about the intro and outro. The intro kind of bled into the metal proper part of this song rather well. I liked the trumpet there at the beginning, and then the trumpet was just gone and replaced with metal guitar. So I was like, okay, whatever. But to bring back much of this feeling towards the end with that noise, bringing the trumpet back, I'm curious what all that's supposed to represent. The beginning just felt like an intro to me. It introduces a little bit of the weight and atmosphere, but that trumpet really isn't a key part, and we didn't dive into any of the largeness of sound yet. Maybe that's all it is supposed to be. An intro, something to allow us to work into the meat of the album, or even the meat of the song. But they do bring it back at the end, and it makes me wonder if the trumpet's supposed to represent something at the beginning that I just didn't pick up on. Regardless, this is certainly a way to kick off a song, to kick off an album. I'm intrigued here. I always say that the first song of an album needs to grab the listener's attention. Khôrada's doing that for me. Interesting composition, wild drum parts, interesting production, and somehow fitting that all into a general post-metal weight. Now, granted, this sort of dreary heaviness isn't usually my cup of tea. I'm not going to say I'm particularly in the mood for something that's going to bring me down, although I wager, based on the music, we're probably going to enter into some heavy lyrics. I mean, we have songs called Seasons of Salt and Water Rights, so, I mean, I'm not expecting an uplifting album out of this. But, as far as musically grabbing my attention, I think this is a solid start to an album. Anything else? Nope, let's dive into some lyrics, see what's going on there. Alright. Lyrically, this is about, I guess humanity as a virus and Earth needing to purge itself of them. It says a ravenous population simultaneously dislocating their own jaws with hopes of swallowing larger prey than they have ever swallowed before. When an entire populace is simultaneously stretching their guts with hopes of holding more and more contents, any last notion of sustainability is buried beneath millions of misconceptions about human needs. It talks about how we just keep wanting more and more. And it isn't even just pointing the finger at a few people. It calls it a ravenous population. Maybe not necessarily pointing the finger at every human, but definitely a majority of them. Enough to upset the balance of the earth. It mentions how people take more than they need, leaving not enough for others. We lack this balance. It says that we have a misconception about human needs. What do we actually need? And if we have more than that, why are we allowing people who have needs unmet to go unfulfilled? So here at the end, it says nature is convinced it's time for a sixth extinction event before man has the chance to gnaw her to the bone. So before Earth is completely hollowed out and destroyed, it's going to fight back. It says, lay down and let her devour you, flood and flame and hurricanes clearing her slate again, rain and plagues and earthquakes going to great pains to recreate the great dying, the Permian-Triassic event. Wiping the slate clean, starting over, allowing evolution to take a different course this time, and doing so with natural disasters. As it says, floods and hurricanes and plagues and earthquakes. It's about the planet fighting back against an invasive species. That's very straightforward. I don't think there's anything else to add to this. I mean, connecting it back to the song. Ooh, okay. So connecting it back to the song, majority of what I think are the metal sections here, it's the focus on humanity consuming more than they need. There's a couple of different ways to interpret the music in this context. I mean, one is just the slow weight of it all. The gluttonous element, having consumed all of this, we can barely even function anymore. Imagine somebody eating so much that they're beyond overweight, and are now this, slow, slogging human being. But I think the other element is the fighting back, too. You can try to avoid conspicuous consumption. You can try to only take what you need, but in many cultures, I'm going to put it that way, this is the norm. You have to sort of deprogram yourself out of this, and then it's easy to get sucked right back into it. Everyone does it. You're the outcast. You're the deviant of society for only taking what you need. You're the weirdo who doesn't have the latest phone updating every 6 months or something. You're the person who still has their TV from 10 years ago, even though, hey, don't you know new technology's out? And look, dude, I'm not even like pointing the finger at anyone, right? This is me too, right? Like I'm aware of it at least, and I try to cut things where I can. But yeah, I'm a tech nerd. It gets easy to get swept up in stuff. Is my TV fully functional? Sure. Does it have the latest and greatest? No. I mean, I get sucked into that, right? It's I think it's impossible to completely live only on your needs, particularly because of environment, society, stuff like that, and upbringing too. A lot of this is just kind of baked into us with advertising as well. But I mean, just look at how much people purchased and hoarded uh, right after the Great Depression, at least in the US, anyways. I mean, this led to homes full of trinkets and stuff. It's just baked into. Again, I say this probably exists across many cultures, but definitely, I have a U.S. perspective here. This is where I feel very confident in saying this. I mean, it's just baked into our society to just buy, own, have more, bigger meals, bigger TVs, bigger trucks, always more than you need. And that's just your average person. Let's not even begin on millionaires, billionaires, people who definitely have more than they need and could easily rectify the issues that we have with, a lack of housing, lack of food for people, homeless, those going hungry, and basically a lot of the problems we have in America. These could be solved with a fraction of what these people have, and that's just on like the human versus human level. This song's talking about humanity versus the planet, which means we just need to extrapolate this from greed against our neighbor to greed against climate control, greed against the planet. And it says the planet's going to fight back. And we kind of see that, don't we? I tell you what, man, the last 5 years, probably more than that, but this is where I've really started to notice it, the massive increase in the number of destructive natural disasters. Yeah, I can see where the song's coming from, musically, lyrically. It all comes together. What I find most interesting then is the end. There is noise at the end of this track, sure. Feedback, tremolo picking. But the trumpet, that optimism. No, that hopefulness. That's what it was. Hopefulness without optimism. The lyrics give up here. I skipped right to the part where it talks about all the natural disasters, but there is one line says, lay down and let her devour you. I don't remember if I had read that to y'all. It's about giving in. And I suppose, based on the music, the positivity that you can find in that, not necessarily in the death, right? Because there's a way of looking at that in a sort of giving up kind of perspective. Life isn't working, so embrace death. But I think it's more about the inevitable. The earth will defeat us. Just let her. After what we've done, she deserves to find peace. That kind of idea. And finding that positive resolve in the concept of the earth fighting back. And the peace, I think, is supposed to represent the earth's peace. Granted, there's still the noise in the background. That might be humanity's dying, a death rattle, fighting back despite, going to lose out. But the calm that sort of exists on top of that in the focus of the ending, I think that's just the earth. ready for a moment of peace and on the brink of finding it. Let's move on. I did rewind the track, 18 seconds. We're going to get a little bit of this drone buildup before we move into track 2. Let's kick it. We have 2 big guitars, but we do have a lighter, thinner guitar off to the side now. A lot of sub bass on this track. Interesting walking idea over here on top of the tremolo, or not the tremolo, just the 16th note picking. Into a bit of a release from that tension. A different harmonic dyad here on the 2 vocals. That open hi-hat. Yeah, this is interesting. We've kind of lost that post-metal element. We still have big guitars, but they're focused more on riffage than weight and texture. I was not expecting galloping on this album, not after that first track. Snare on 2 and 4 really pushing the song forward. This guitar is just kind of doing its own thing. We have that walking up idea from earlier. I feel like it fits less cohesively in this section, but it is nice to hear it come back. Oh, I thought that guitar was going to continue on. That was a cool little idea. Like a one-bar lick that really felt like an intro into a larger melody. Still leaning into that snare on 2 and 4. I mean, they've been doing that for a while. It's the noisy guitar on this side. I think the pitches are fine. It's just a really treble heavy, squealy tone. Interesting. There's a lot of tapping in that transition on both guitars. Well, I don't think tapping per se, hammer-ons, so at the very least, we haven't heard that sort of legato style of playing much at all on this album. I'm just gonna throw this out right here. Subjectively speaking, they lost me. I thought Edeste was a fantastic start to an album. Everything I loved about it wasn't really present here, and this went into a very different direction. I don't think any of this was poorly done. It's just not my cup of tea. Um, and now I'm really curious where they're going to decide to take the album because, yeah, you start off with two different styles, and one I'm here for and one I'm not. It's kind of 50-50 what the rest of the album's going to sound like. Unless they decide to keep reinventing themselves, in which case it's still kind of up in the air if I'm going to enjoy myself or not. Granted, we are like a third of the way done with this album already, so there's not a lot left. There are 7 tracks, but one of them is only a 2-minute, I'm going to assume, introduction track to another. A little interlude, possibly. So we're looking at 6 tracks that all hover around the 10-minute mark. 2 out of 6 down. So there's not a lot left. I'm kind of hoping they return back to that Edeste sound, though. But, we'll see. Right? I haven't written them off yet. Just, I found this to not be as strong of a part of the album as they kicked it off with. They set the bar real high, though, right? That's dangerous. I mentioned that you want to grab people on that first song, right? They put your CD in for the first. Oh, I guess they click on your first song on a streaming platform first. As opposed to CD analogy doesn't really work in modern times too much. But you want to pull them in. You want that listener to be like, oh dang, I gotta finish this. I want to go to that next track. But if you set that bar too high, you'll never quite hit that same peak. It's difficult, man. I'm not going to say that there's any science behind track listings. I think a lot of it's just luck of the draw. I criticize the order of tracks at times, but I try to give that counter too, that you can't really know. There's no way of knowing the best way to order an album, even after it's been out for decades. You've got tons of feedback from millions of listeners. You can still, man, there's going to be an order that doesn't work for somebody and they wished it would have been the way that you did it. There's no perfect way to do it. But I am a bit let down here. This is a weaker follow-up, I think, just personally. What is going on here, though? Riffs. I mentioned that track 1 is very focused on texture and atmosphere. That, to me, it was a post-metal song with some other elements to it. The drumming got a little fancy at times. We had some melodic riffs coming out from one of the guitars, but for the most part, it's just supposed to feel very, very draining, just as weight overbearing on you. This is not that. The song kicks off with a lot of energy. We have, even just listening to the drums, accents, snare, 2 and 4, all the time. That is a driving style right there. There were a couple times we deviated away from it, introducing some more flourishy melodic drumming. We always came back to it and until the end, when we just accented every beat. And I think we pushed into some 8th note bass kicks as well there for a brief moment. So just ramping things up. That's what the end of the song did. We were already moving at a brisk pace, and they just accelerated it. Pedal to the metal, just all the way down. And that's just like the exact opposite of the last song, which is interesting too, because the last song was about having or taking more than you need, being gluttonous. Yeah, there's lethargy in that, but I also think that it's a sort of accelerated doom now that I think about it. This concept of, if we just take what we need, we can coexist, but if we take too much, we're going to bring the death of the planet upon us. Or in another way, as the song represents, the wrath of the planet. We're going to accelerate our time as a species here and bring it to a close early. In a sense, I think you could have done either a fast song or a slow song for track 1, and there still would have been thematic elements that tied into it. Regardless, though, they went for a slow one, and here we get our driving speed. And it's very riff heavy, right? We kick it off with two big guitars, and then it was over here on the left side, right? A little thin guitar again. This one giving us a nice little melody. Honestly, I enjoyed what was going on there. It kind of feels like it takes the same place as the trumpet at the beginning of track 1. Kind of being that thin melody against, I don't know, a disastrous background. But once we get past this point, we kind of introduce some standard metal riffage going on. We have these wild walking up ideas on the right guitar that I don't know always worked. They were kind of cool the first time, and I love callback. So when we heard them again later in the track, I was like, oh, that's neat. But I don't necessarily think they worked there. Bit of clashing. Maybe that's intentional, though. I mean, Seasons of Salt. I mean, if we're talking about cooking, yeah, a season when we have salt. It's a season even salt being a season in and of itself. But maybe you can't grow salt year round, so you have a season where you actually get some, and your food tastes good this season. That would be good, right? A song about positivity. I'm not thinking that's where this is gonna go though. Based on track 1's lyrics, this is probably using salt in a more negative sense. Salt in the wound, salt on the earth. If we're gonna keep with the nature themes. Even just people being salty, negative towards each other. Yeah, so maybe the disruptive part of the song is intentional. But I found that in track 1, we did have moments where the two guitars were sort of doing their own thing, but I felt that it was anytime that they tried to stretch out into those directions, they got snapped back into that slower, brooding feel. Here, though, the entire song is about these faster riffs, about the two guitars doing their own thing at all times, and not just being texture, atmosphere chords, but both of them having their own moving riffs. And so a lot of this song to me is about trying to measure out how these two guitars are pushing the song forward. Because the vocals, let's talk about the vocals. I'm still trying to get used to them. They are not my favorite kind of clean vocals here. I don't know exactly what it is about them that I'm just not clicking with. However, I can tell you what's going on with them, like from a objective point of view. They're very muted emotionally, I think. Even when we get some like compressed cleans in there, I think the volume, I think the overall production compression on them, they all feel small and bland. They're lacking color, they're lacking emotion. It's either just a low sound like this, kind of feeling bored at times. There's a higher pitch one like that just kind of feels like the words are just flowing out very matter-of-factly. And then there's the one, I can't emulate this one, where they put some compression on top of even higher ranged pitches. It's not necessarily a fry scream, I think it's just compressed cleans. These, I think, have the most emotion to them, but they're also sort of just done matter-of-factly, as if it's an example. This is how you put compression on your cleans, and then you just make a sound. There's no passion in it. There's no emotion. It's a display. It's an example of how to do the technique, and that's how the vocals come across to me almost entirely throughout this song. I didn't comment on this for the first track, so I don't actually know if I felt the same way about those lyrics. I mean, that was almost an hour ago now. But it's going to be on my mind moving forward, how I relate to the vocal delivery on this album. But here, I'm just not clicking with the vocals at all. They all just feel like they just are. these are the words, I need to say them in this style, so I do it, and it sounds good in the music, right? I'm not saying that they're distracting, that they're poorly delivered, anything like that. I'm just not getting an emotional connection to them. That, plus the fact that they're still pushed down a bit in the mix, more so than I would like them to, kind of makes them a secondary element of the song for me. I'm not connecting with them. The song isn't actively supporting them in any way. The guitars, like I mentioned, are the key thing. It's the part of the song that I looked forward to hearing what was going on new in each section. Because additionally, the drums were less expressive on this one. Sure, a couple of flourishes here and there, but for the most part, they were locked in, right? This is some old school metal, be a good metronome, have some flourish, have some drum fills, but for the most part, just be driving and aggressive. Nothing technical, nothing too fancy, not a lot of frills. It works for what it does. This song has a very different personality, has a very different color palette than the first track. If that's what they're going for, absolutely nailed it. But I think all of these little changes are also why I connected with the first one more. I found it to be a bit more expressive in the musicality. I found ways that I could engage with it more, and I found that even just on a technical level, it was more impressive to me. And so, with the bass just doing bass things for majority of this, and the drums being a human aggressive metronome, and the vocals just saying the words, as far as I can tell, that just leaves us the guitar work. At least that's all I found in here to really click with. Now, granted, there are some interesting riffs in here. Individually, listening to each of the guitars, we have walk-ups, we have walk-downs, we have rule of cool riffage, we have some things that are slightly more melodic. We actually move across octaves this time around. I thought that was nice. Last time, you had your low guitars, you had your high guitar. Your high guitar did melody, your low guitar did texture. You didn't deviate from that at all. Here, we do see some deviation. We get to hear these tones in different contexts, playing different things. I like that. We also have what sounds to be 3 guitars this time around. Y'all can correct me on that if you didn't hear the same thing. But there are a couple passages where it sounds like possibly one of the guitarists did a double track with one tone and part, and then changing the tone to something else and playing a different part. Either that or there are 3 guitarists in here and 2 of them are just playing the same thing on that first track, which I suppose, yeah, I haven't looked up a personnel list, so honestly, I don't know how many people are in this band. But there are more guitar parts on this song than on track 1. And I like that too. It creates more layers of counterpoint here. It allows one of the guitars to be that really massive sound while the other 2 are playing with counterpoint of having 2 melodies going on at the same time, or 2 riffs, generally speaking. Melodic in quality, sure, but melody, I found they were a bit too lacking to call them that. And I was actually a bit disappointed towards the end. The left guitar actually started out pretty low, very riff style music, and then started to escalate into some higher tones. And we landed on this nice, clear pitch that had a bit of tension to it and just allowed it to ring out with a little bit of vibrato. I was like, oh, cool. We rose up to this. They've come into the spotlight. They're going to continue this idea in a proper melody. And then, no, that was just the end of the riff. I was a little disappointed with that. You teased me. You made it sound like you were going to do something with that. And no, you didn't. So that was one of the points where I wish they had done something a little different. But generally speaking, I feel like both of the guitars are just sort of doing their own thing. Not necessarily being disruptive to each other. I don't think that they're creating noise and chaos, but they're not working together like proper counterpoint would. It is simply just 2 melodic riffs happening at the same time. There isn't really any interplay between them. They're not accenting the same things. They're not accenting around each other. They're not really creating interesting harmony. It all just still has that pentatonic metal sound to it. We're not getting more interesting dyads out of it. There really isn't any spice being pulled in either harmonically. There's a lot of opportunities to create something a little more complex, and they purposefully avoid it at every turn. It makes me think that it's completely intentional. You can't make two ideas just haphazardly avoid each other at every corner. It is kind of baffling how separated the two ideas are in almost every section of this song. That sort of consistency is deliberate. And so I have to appreciate that, if nothing else than just a technical marvel of it, of writing so many dual riffs that don't acknowledge each other at all, as if the two guitars are completely oblivious of each other. It's wild. But also so much skill goes into that. I don't know that I could do that. One riff, maybe. Two sections, maybe. A whole song of that? I mean, I'm going to run out of ideas. I mean, part of that's just that I feel more natural writing dual melodies that engage with each other. Like, that's my bread and butter right there. So it just comes more naturally to me. So I'd have to really think about it, but like, I'd have to really think about this. And maybe this is just something that comes naturally to them, but is at some point, conscious or subconscious, they are deliberately writing these types of guitar riffs. And I find that very interesting. It's so different from my type of writing. So, um, I don't necessarily think I like it, but from an artistic perspective, I got so much, what's that word? Admiration for it. And I kind of wish I could do a little bit of envy, I suppose. It's a technique I'd like to be able to sneak in at times that I don't always have confidence I'd be able to pull off properly. Now, all of these guitar riffs, though, and sections and varying ideas and subtle callbacks to places, the song ends up doing something really well that the first one didn't care for. That's push and pull. This song has very drastic differences in its highs and its lows, whether that's a noisy high to a more contained low, or if that's volume high to a volume low, tension to release, dissonance to consonance, whatever. They are constantly creating contrasting ideas to allow the song to have a pacing and a flow to it. We never really stick with any idea for any long amount of time. Everything is, it's introduced, it's executed upon, it's wrapped up, and then we move on to another idea. And the other idea could just be a bass tone, giving us a foundation and a light drum thing to bring the energy down. It could be brand new multi-layered ideas. It could be introducing some vocal fry. It could be, whatever, bringing in something noisier, intenser. There's always a drastic shift in direction every 16 bars or so. And it gives the song a feeling of water, of waves, rising up, cresting, and crashing down, rising up, cresting, and crashing down. And the song does this very well. The first track was very singular in its approach. It is heavy, it is brooding. Sometimes we'll stretch outside of that, but we always snap back and stay back into that main mode there. It's rather static in its dynamics, in its emotion. This is the opposite. Much like how the riffage is totally different from track one, the pacing of this is totally different. They went out of their way to ensure that this is a vastly different experience than their first track. I'm curious if that was part of their intention. Again, going back to track ordering, is the purpose to create this rubber banding? I now believe that maybe when we enter track 3, we're going to return to some of that heavier post-metal stuff. And track 4, we may end up going back to some of this more, I don't know, progressive death metal? Is that what we would call this? I'm not entirely sure. But maybe that's the two extremes. We're just going to keep bouncing back and forth between them. With all of that said, let's dive into some lyrics for Seasons of Salt. Once again, I'm enjoying the lyrics. They're rather straightforward, though they do have the use of metaphor in here. There's also, it's not beautiful, flowery language. Like, I don't really want to, I can't really praise the diction of it. It's all rather straightforward as far as language and words used and stuff like that. but there is something about it that's evocative. I think sometimes it goes a little too far. At one point, it describes rain coming from clouds as the clouds disemboweling themselves. That one doesn't land on me quite as well. That's a bizarre way, I think, to describe rainfall. But for the most part, I think there's an evocative use of language here. Not necessarily beautiful in like a poetic sense, but something about it grabs me. Anyways, as far as the topic is concerned, we are continuing on with the death of humankind because they consume too much. Is this the theme of the album? I don't know. It says the damage is done. We've consumed it all and caved to the sun and the seasons of salt. When the meat has nothing left to eat and self reflects existentially, church and state scour the skies for ways to explain exactly why they now fill their guts on the flesh of their constituents. Basically saying that when we have consumed everything we can of the earth, we will turn on each other. It says when the meat has nothing left to eat. It says both the church and the state. It says scour the skies for ways to explain why they fill their guts on the flesh of their constituents. I really like this. It says that they will look everywhere to find some sort of explanation or excuse for why they are going to prey on us, why they're better than us. Church and state, religion and government, basically those above. I think it's interesting that it specifically calls out those two. When was this made? Also, I'm kind of, dude, don't I want to look at that yet? I want background information about this band, about this album, when it came out, where the band is from. That might help understand a little bit of their politics and maybe who they're specifically speaking about. I mean, both of these tracks, though, coming at it from a very US perspective, yeah, it would not surprise me if this was a US band. I feel like a lot of this is easy to relate to. But it's interesting how we have church and state, but it doesn't bring up 1%, the billionaires, the oligarchs, anything in that line. Although I suppose state could represent those if we view the government as an oligarchy. So maybe I just answered that one myself. Anyways, like I said, they're going to find anything they can to explain why they deserve to consume you now that there's nothing left of the earth to consume. Says a new food chain defined by class and race and breeding stock by those who best can spin stories of disappointed gods. Again, not out here trying to find truth. It's about spinning stories. It's about redirection. It's about telling lies. It's about being charismatic, I think, too. Not necessarily just about who's the best liar, but who can sell the best lie. They will be on the top of everything. Says history has shown that man will gnaw the bones of friends in the end. Just using a history of self-preservation, using cannibalism for self-preservation in dire times to justify their vision of how the future of humanity will eventually be. It says that eventually rain might fall, but it'll be long after we need it. And instead of repairing the earth so that we can have something to consume other than our neighbor, it'll be only to wash the bodies away of those who have succumbed to our greatest weakness, a need for sustenance. I think that's an interesting thing there. That the need for food and water is our biggest weakness. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but I think I understand where he's coming from. He says, we'll hide from the light and our desperate neighbors, that the clouds will rain down on us for far too late for us to grow any grains, but something will grow in our place. Once the salt is washed away, the rain will reclaim. So once again, this just says that humanity will be their own downfall, that the earth will conspire against us, though this time not looking at destructive means, just withholding means that we need, and that we'll eventually turn on ourselves, annihilate ourselves, and the earth will grow something after us. Not too different than we saw in the last track, too. There's definitely a theme on this, right? Trying to relate this back to the more aggressive musical stance here, less overbearing and more acceleratory. I don't know. I mean, the concept of humans running out of resources and turning on each other, maybe getting real Mad Maxy up in here. I can kind of see an accelerated element to that, how it would accelerate our annihilation. But I mean, it's not like we haven't turned on each other already, right? We have so many deaths at the hands of other humans, even today, right now. I don't see how a metaphor of cannibalism changes that much at all. Maybe it does accelerate the rate that we kill people. I don't know. I'm finding less parallels thematically on this track than I did the first. Let's move on into track 3. Other than that 1-minute interlude, this is the shortest one on the album at just 6 minutes long. It's called Water Rights. Let's see what they're doing here. Not necessarily a hard stop, there is a reverb of that final tone crossing over into this track, but it's less connected than tracks 1 and 2 were. They do like their high reverb textures, don't they? Okay, I don't think we're going back to a post-metal sound. This has momentum to it. Lots of tom work for that roll. Alright, kind of industrial here. Slow burn, adding layers. And so we should have a left hand guitar. That's this left guitar over here. Oh, another layer. Totally unexpected sound here. Oh, yeah. It kind of has a gothic element with these vocals and the high reverb on them. I'm liking this new vocal delivery too. Okay, so that little transition was in 5/4, but we're back to 4/4 here. Oh, they faked me out with that. The offbeat ride simple's killing me here. Also, against that syncopated snare pattern. It's so bouncy. And this is like a metallic tone with like the riff reminded me of like something indie rock for a second, but indie punk maybe. Now we moved in a totally different direction. Oh yeah, really bringing in that punk right here. Because I'm fairly certain that's a transition. We'll stop it right there. So remember, like 10, 20 minutes ago, I had mentioned they have their heavier post-metal style and this more driving metal, death metal possibly. And I was like, I wonder if we're going to bounce back and forth between these two. Or maybe they're just going to keep reinventing the wheel and do different metal styles for every track. I think we're getting that last option here. This is wild. I think I enjoyed this a bit more than Season's Assault, but I still don't think it's as strong as Edeste, and I think that's just because, again, it's not really my style of music. This reminds me heavily of like industrial goth metal, as far as like atmosphere and texture go, with more almost like heavy metal riffage to it, right? And a little dash of new metal. Anyone getting that? It's still very texture heavy. Big guitars, not a lot of, the chorus, right? It's just two notes over and over. Like, this is like the cornerstone of heavy metal, was very simple writing with metallic tones. And like, I can hear that here. The heavy reverb on the low, dreary vocals. I don't really think the vocal delivery has changed much from the other two tracks, but the production on it has. There's a little bit more vibrancy to it. I don't think there's more treble focus in the EQing of it. It just feels clearer than it's ever been. There's a little bit more reverb on the sides to make them feel very large. It reminds me of My Dying Bride vocals in a way that I haven't really made that connection on the previous tracks, despite, again, I don't think the vocalist doing anything different here. It's all on the production side. There are some new harmonic textures going on here. I think as far as chords being used, a lot of it is still very pentatonic heavy, creating that very stereotypical metal sound, but we're deviating a little bit from that as well, bringing in something that feels a bit more theatric. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing to create this feeling. It might be in the melodies, it might be in the chord progression, I'm not sure. But all of this is coming together to create something that feels like industrial metal with a dash of gothic thrown in there. It's just, I don't know, dude. What's the metaphor here? Are we changing up the colors of the palette entirely? Or are we just mixing colors in different ways? I don't know. All I do know is that these three songs, despite all being generally metal with very similar sounding instruments throughout, have three totally different feelings to them, and I think attract very different types of fans of music. That's not to say that you can't be a fan of everything that they're showing on display here, sure. But at least with my experience is that they're all representing very different ideas and directions of writing metal music, and I don't think that all of these songs are going to click with everyone. It's not quite as extreme as some of the bands that are albums that we've listened to where they decide to jump around between genres on different tracks. This is all still very clearly in a heavy distorted metal kind of sound. But I mean, I'm sitting here 1 for 3 on this. I think Water Rights is a little bit more up my alley, but again, I mean, it's just not Edeste. That song still rocks my socks, man. And it's interesting to listen to them sort of reinvent themselves every song and take this core idea, right? The big fuzzy guitar, that sound hasn't changed much. The vocal delivery, that really hasn't changed at all. I'd go so far as to say some of the more melodic riffs, the underlying ideas compositionally that kind of work within how these people write melodies, that doesn't really change much at all. The notes might change, the note relationships to achieve different emotional elements out of it. But like the melody itself, nah, I hear a lot of similarities between them. As I mean, that's pretty typical. That's not a. I'm not throwing shade at them. Anybody who writes music has things that they fall into. You know, their grooves. You can find this kind of stuff in anybody, whether you're looking at a pop artist, rock artist, metal artist, going back to classical, the greats, if you will. They have their own trappings too, things that make it, distinctively a Bach piece versus a Beethoven piece, things that they just liked to do more often than another composer did. So I can still hear how this is all composed by the same group of people, but they're just choosing different harmonic qualities and different production techniques in order to craft very different atmospheres on these. And it's kind of neat. I think I'm more receptive to this than I have in some other bands that we've checked out that jump around between ideas. And I think a lot of it is just because there's still a metal cohesion to all of this. But it is leading me to have favorites on the album very early on, right? Usually I find my favorite of an album late into it. Once I've kind of got a gist for what they're doing, and I find the song where they do that thing really well. Where like this was the peak of their kind of writing. But here the style has been so different every time that my favorite just happened to be the one right off the bat. With all that said, I mean, looking at some more specific things in here, this one comes off as way high energy and not in the sort of driving aggressiveness that Seasons of Salt had. This is sort of a fun sort of high energy. I mean, they're at the end. Once the drums had that syncopated snare accent beat and the offbeat ride cymbal stuff, I mean, I'm over here bouncing around. It's just a fun section. Even towards the beginning of the song, I didn't vocalize this because I wasn't entirely sure of it. And even right now, I'm like, it's only like 30% similarity. But there's a little bit of like a Dark Carnival vibe going on in the opening of the song. It's mostly harmonic. It isn't really present rhythmically. It's vaguely present texture-wise as far as like the kinds of sounds that they're using here, but it's a little bit in that melody writing, just kind of little passages in the riffs here and there. I'm like, oh, okay, kind of like a Dark Carnival, I get it, but not really ever like full on going in that stereotypical direction. More of like a spice added to their style of writing. And so even from the very beginning, it kind of has a fun element to it that the others haven't. The other two songs are serious business from the beginning to the end. But not this one. It has driving energy in a very bouncy, fun kind of way. The drums are consistently fun. Those fills are ridiculously cool. Even looking at the drum patterns themselves, they are consistent and rigid, very metronomic. Not really looking at much of the flourish that we saw on Edeste, but having a bit of levity to it. It's not just driving the beat. There's accents to it that aren't just on downbeats. There's syncopation to it. When you listen to, particularly, I think, the snare and the bass kick, the cymbals tend to be a bit more rigid, laying down, a consistent pattern. But either the bass kick or the snare are doing something rhythmically interesting to create something that feels groovier, bouncier. I feel like there's a lot of punk influence in the drumming on this in particular, especially as we get closer to the end of the song, the final minute or so, we begin to see some hardcore elements come in of just being super aggressive with the drum kit in a way that, I mean, could be kind of metallic, but not in the same type of aggressiveness we saw in Season Assault, which did have that metallic aggression to it. This felt a bit angstier rather than meaner, if that makes sense. Go back and listen to the two endings. Season's Assault's like final minute and Water Right's final 30 seconds or so. I think you'll hear a very different type of aggression in the drum kit on both of those. And I wish I could put that into words why, what's, specifically is going on in the two. This one just ends up feeling a bit more hardcore punk to me. And I lack the words to properly get into why. I just my gut says so. But I mean, when you pair some of these bouncier guitar or drum ideas against the more melodic riffage, against the production on the vocals, against the Dark Carnival things, it's a funner song, but it isn't a fun song, right? I don't think there's any part of this track that's just like, hey, it's light and bouncy and cheerful. Like, no, it's still an aggressive track. It's still metal. Just rhythmically, there's a ton of freaking groove in here. And this actually takes me to the guitar work and the vocals. I suppose just melody writing in general. I feel like this is a bigger center stage for melody writing on this track. As I mentioned, the other two tracks, the vocals kind of get stuffed into the mix. They are the core melody. We might have melodic riffage from the guitars, but a lot of the guitar work is harmonic, either presenting chordal information or atmospheric texture, creating these big tones to kind of give us the feeling of weight. And now here, though, no, the vocals are given a bit more prominence. We also don't have a lot of the dyads that we've heard. A lot of the vocal work has been harmonized. Two vocalists. Not so here. In a few places, sure, but not the dominating style of vocal delivery on this one. And I don't know if that's the reason that they gave the vocals more prominence, more volume, is because there's only one vocalist here. Regardless, though, the end result is that I can hear what the vocals are doing more often. I also feel like there's a bit more air pressure to the vocal delivery here. Again, not a lot of change in timbre. The vocals still sound like the same vocals we've heard this entire time, but they feel like there's projection to them. And some of this might just be the increased volume. I find that I can engage with them a little bit more on an emotional level than the other two tracks. It might just be all in my mind. They are more present, they are louder, thus they are more passionate. Maybe it's just something so stupidly psychological as that. Production plays such a big role in how we engage with music. I mean, our brains are not intelligent. in general, as humans, our brains can be really dumb, and can be hijacked really easily. And something as simple as tweaking a knob to adjust the volume of a sound can have a drastically different connection to somebody. And it might just be that. Regardless, I found the vocals to be a bit more evocative, and they felt impassioned about what they were saying. They feel like they felt it more so than just reading something that they've been, a piece of paper put in front of them. These are the words you have to say, sing them as best you can, and just, okay. No, this feels like the person wrote it, and they mean it, and they need this message to get out. It's not quite as emotional as pop emo, post-hardcore. I mean, these young kids usually screaming at the top of their lungs in some of the highest pitches they can hit. You can feel the energy it takes to deliver it. To me, that typically translates into passion and emotion, even if I understand not a lot of people like whiny emo vocals. But I mean, I definitely feel more connection to these than the other two songs. It feels like he means these in a way that I haven't heard him yet. I really appreciate that on this track. But even when we look at the melodies that are being sung, I feel like there's more movement to them. The pitches are more varied as well. I feel like this vocalist can start low and in the middle of a sentence sweep up to the octave above, play around with some notes up here and bring it back down. I think there's better carving out of pacing, of melodic flow on this track than we've seen in the others. Part of that just might be because the vocals get drowned out in the other tracks, and I haven't noticed this. But being front and center, I can clearly see this. And I hear it in the guitar melodies as well. Granted, a lot of this is still riff heavy. It's not so much a linear melody as much as a riff that you're going to play from start to finish and start over. Again, a repeated phrase. But I feel like these are less rhythmic, less harmonic, and more focused on forward momentum. Even looking at track 2, you remember I was pointing out some of the guitar work in there, and it's just very cyclical. You pick a couple of notes and you play them, just in a repeated fashion. Here we seem to have a little bit more movement to it. I feel like there's some really great counterpoint in here that works on an elongated level, not just a 1-bar phrase, but 2 and sometimes even 4-bar phrases, just kind of lengthening out how long of a musical idea is, how long it exists before the repetition kicks in. That allows the song, to me at least, to feel more of a forward direction rather than stuck in a cycle, even though it is still a cyclical idea. But that's not to ignore the fact that this one also has some very simple, stupid riffs to it. And I say stupid just that it's like an endearing kind of stupid. It's not that it's brain dead, but it gives the impression of that. Like I said, in the chorus, we just have 2 notes, a low one or a high one and a low one. You just bounce back and forth between them. It is like cornerstone nu metal. Even post-hardcore has borrowed a lot of this, except that's not really metal. And I kind of want to stick with the metal framework because of the tone of the instruments here. But I mean, you can hear this all over the place in 2000s nu metal. Your Corns, not Slipknot, Limp Bizkit, definitely. Some of early System of a Down stuff before they began to really incorporate a lot of melodic writing into their music. I mean, this is just like, it's pure contrast. I have a high note, I have a low note. Who cares about anything in between? Who cares about movement between them? I'm just going to bounce back and forth between them. And I think it's really interesting to listen to how they craft the riffs here. The other songs I think have been rather measured. Not too long, not too short, not too textured, not too melodic, just a nice middle point. Nothing that really leans one way or the other. And here we have these longer melodic riffs juxtaposed with these just ridiculous simple ideas that are there just to feel big and imposing, and to carry that metal contrast. The high and a low note, that's it. It's like the dumbest change of it's like one step up from just playing a single tone. And it just stands so far in contrast to how they've written riffs on this album. This entire song just stands out so much to me, and I find it I don't know, like track 2, like I said, it kind of lost me, right? I thought what they did was very cool, it just wasn't for me. This has me engaged again, not necessarily because I think this song is for me, but because I'm back to the point of saying, where are they going to go from here? All right, track 2 lost me, track 3 I'm back on board. I'm here at the cliffhanger. I'm ready for next week's episode. I want to see how the story continues now. I'm not ready to quit anymore. And I find that to be interesting. For them to grab me, lose me, and grab me again. That doesn't happen very often. I think particularly though, because if I get lost, it's usually on my own. Um, like listening to stuff casually, and I'm just gonna turn the album off. I'm not forced to finish it out. Blessing and a curse, right? Here I'm forced to continue on. Sometimes I can find gold like this. There's definitely been albums I've wanted to quit. I didn't. I couldn't. I had to finish making the video, and I did not enjoy it anymore by the end of the album. Sometimes I hated it even more. So, again, like I said, blessing and curse. I definitely miss out on some good stuff by quitting too early, but there's definitely some albums that they show you who they are at the start and they don't deviate from that. If it isn't clicking, this is definitely a good time to just turn it off. Anyways, yeah, this is an interesting third track. Let's dive into some lyrics, see what's going on with water rights. I think we're also going to do some background info, since, like I said, there are 6 full tracks here. We're at the halfway point. Seems like a good time to look into who the band is and what they're trying to accomplish with the album. Alright, and this is another song about hoarding things of the earth. This one, though, in particular, looks at the basic resources of the earth: water, stones, oil, things that are just inherent part of the planet, and laying claim to them, particularly to resell them to the people of the planet. It says, scrap away the earth, claim the debris as your own, assign a monetary worth, sell back the streams, sell back the stones that had been under their feet all along. I think this particularly is maybe thrown at a company like Nestle, who will take water from a local stream and sell it back to the people who live right next to that stream. This was your water, now it's ours, and if you want, you can buy it back from us, even though we stole it from you. That kind of idea right there. It says that historic treaties so easily defeated by way of eminent domain. So even when we make treaties, when we make partnerships and say, this is yours, this is mine, this is the way things are going to go, you can just walk right over that. Ownership doesn't matter when you have money to back it up. Going along with this, the very next stanza says, prophet has no sense of right or wrong. It talks about a snake that burrows just beneath the lake, afraid that its steel skin can crack and turn the water black with its venom and lack of regulation. Obviously, this would be an oil pipeline that runs beneath water, and when the pipeline breaks, not if, but when, because there is weaker and weaker regulations on safety, it will infect the local waters, which affect the local populations, but nobody cares because you save some money for that year, right? It says, water and oil, salt and stone, commandeer and distribute, native lands diminish returns, trample those who dare dispute, slowing your charge with their songs. So when people claim that a land is sacred, that's just hurting your bottom line. How's that supposed to help? Anyone who stands in your way gets trampled beneath your feet because you got another penny to make. Talks about revolting against this, but how any sort of revolts and chants, no matter how big they get, they're never big enough to actually stop any of this, that shareholders with bulldozers declare what is and isn't sacred. And so eventually, word comes down from the biggest suits of all, we're going to pillage the water rights as the snow falls. It says we'll disregard their thirst. Who cares if they're thirsty? Wasn't it a CEO just in the last half decade who distributed water, said that water wasn't a human right? God, I wish I could remember who said that. just blatantly and publicly. I don't think it was like a leaked email or anything. Like, just got on camera and said it. Water is not a human right. So yeah, disregard the thirst. That's exactly what the band is stating right here. It says, at the end of the day, you'll say it's only business. But when home, health, and history are all shoveled away, the only thing that's gained is wealth at any cost. Yep. It's about carving out the earth for your own benefit to the detriment of, again, your neighbor. I mean, this whole thing is about humans harming humans by harming the planet. Like, it's just cycles of destruction. That's what this album's going on about. I'm going to take a second to read a little bit about the band, and then we're going to continue on with the back half of this album. All right. Now, this is a bit of a super group here. We have the guitarist, bassist, and drummer of Agalloch, and the vocalist guitarist, single person, from Giant Squid. Agalloch is from Portland, Oregon. Giant Squid hails from California. So it's a totally US-made band. This album came out in 2018. It's self-described as being atmospheric, aggressive, and apocalyptic. The album's emotion is driven by the band members' views of today's world. These are precarious times. It was written under the pressure and uncertainty of the beginning of the Trump era, standing as a musical exploration of the routine madness we now live. Okay. So I think my primarily US perspective on some of these lyrics is probably what they were intending as well. Now, I don't think we've heard any Giant Squid, but Agalloch's been on the channel a couple of times. I can hear a little bit of that in here, but maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I just haven't. Maybe I'm misremembering Agalloch. Anyways, that's all. Part of that's just interesting to know where the band comes from, how it's a supergroup of two other groups, but I don't think that the description of the album or what the band's purpose is of it really changes much of my view on it, because I was kind of right on board with that. But sometimes it's nice to get a little bit of that confirmation. All right. Glacial Gold is next. 8.5 minutes. I don't know what to do with the minute song. Do I run that with this? I guess we'll just see. Because track 6 is 11 minutes. I think we'll just run these two back to back. Alright, let's dive in. Okay, so we have this wind. Sounds kind of chilly, goes into glacial gold. I stood helpless, lay by, as a mountain of ice slowly crawled over my still-built life. What was that sound? You know, I totally forgot that track 1 had a trumpet until I heard the violin. I like when they have more exploratory ideas like this. I love the guitar over here. Little textures. Yeah, that was a well-deserved explosive transition. I got a 3-3-3-4 idea going on there. Very imposing. This captures some of that post-metal vibe from track 1 and translates it into like a doomier feeling, doomier riffage. The violin pulling us down, helping us through that transition. I like that. This guitar line over here. Yeah, that's a neat little texture to add on top of this just big monolithic sounds. Sneaky little triplet thing on the drums. Nice little harmony there. Are they going to use this energy to ramp up into something? No, they're going to keep it slow. Okay. Nice back and forth too. You know, it's interesting too. Little specks and flecks in that last section once again remind me of Godsmack. A lot heavier than Godsmack would ever done, but the harmonic ideas. A proper ending. I'm going to take it. I'm going to take this proper ending because we don't get too many of them. We'll let tracks 5 and 6 go into one another, I suppose. I think I just hit the mic. Yeah, dude, that was awesome. That brought back a lot of the doomier vibes from track 1, and I think found a way to express them in a cohesive pattern, a cohesive package that retains a lot of the fluidity that we saw in Water Rights. I think really Seasons Assault, what really bounced off of me is a little bit of the disjointedness of it. And it was even something I talked about a little bit on track 1, Edeste, that, you know, there's a lot of chaos going on, a lot of noisier bits, a lot of separation of ideas. Water Rights, I think, really found that point of trying to create a cohesive whole out of a bunch of disparate ideas. And Glacial Gold takes that and pairs it with that heavier, weightier, post-metal, doom metal sound that Edeste sort of wanted to lean into and kind of danced around. And it creates what I think is the most cohesive track on the album, not just in theme, but also in writing, in flow, in pacing. This song consistently finds new heights and new lows, hanging on to ideas for a while, not just jumping back and forth between them, but staying down here for a while, moving up, finding a peak, going up a little bit above that, creating a new peak, and then dipping down to a new low, and hanging on to these ideas and allowing them to resonate and grow and become full ideas, starting usually from less than and then building on top of. But it does so with the smoothest of transitions too. I mean, Seasons Assault had rough transitions all over the place. I shouldn't say rough, harsh transitions. That's more objective. Water Rights, harsh transitions. Even Edeste was mostly harsh transitions. We had that nice trumpet bit at the beginning that kind of eased us into it, but after that, all right, smoothness was thrown out the window. Glacial Gold finds that medium point between all of everything they've been creating. The only thing it doesn't try to work into the equation is some of that more upbeat stuff that we saw at the end of Seasons Assault and that dominated Water Rights. But I feel like this is Khôrada at their best. This is just so great. They understand. I mean, it's not to say that they don't understand what they're doing on the other tracks. They do. They're going for different kinds of writing there. This is the one that really clicks with me. I guess that's the more accurate description here. Every transition in here is smooth, totally solid. We have guitar ideas fading in and fading out. We have, I mean, one of my favorite things happens on here a couple of times is where we'll have a really big guitar tone transition down to something a bit more narrow and mellow, kind of losing its width, but and a little bit of its volume, but not losing its bite. And this is done by just kind of reducing the size of it and the volume a little bit over time, but that doesn't mean that we're just going to hold a note out and do this manipulation. The guitar is just going to continue to play this riff, or at times even melodies, while the tone is getting manipulated, and it just sort of allows a heavier sound to transition into a lighter one very naturally as the melodic line is pulling us through this transition. We also had sections that we introduced a new instrument prior to the section itself. We had a violin come in underneath the metal part. And as we reduced that energy just a little bit, the violin kind of scooped up in volume. It was there at the end of the metal section and just kind of rose into prominence as we were moving into a section that it needed spotlight. It's a little bit of a crossfade there, sure, but I mean, on the other hand, it's also just a really nice way of introducing a new sound in the current section so that we can tie that into the next section. We had all sorts of these sections, crescendos to bring us up into a new part. I think there was only one part in here where we had a harsh change from a low to a high, and I thought that was exceptionally well deserved because of all the other smooth transitions we had. It allowed this one to stand out and create a little bit of contrast to make this bigger section not feel like something we've built into, but something that has stepped down on what we were originally working on and just crushes it, and you're immediately forced to face this new titan. It's the contrast of it that makes it feel as big as it is. It gives it the punch that it has. It is used not because it is the default state of transitions, but because it is different than everything else we have used. It is contrast in and of itself, while also narrative storytelling. I mean, just, yes, like I've said in the past, I'm not a big fan of harsh transitions, but I think it's just because metal uses them so often they become the norm. But I'm not blanket statement against them. I love them when they fit what the song is doing. And that's going to change from song to song. Sometimes you want all the harsh transitions. If your song is supposed to be bonkers, crazy stuff all the time, yeah, you aren't writing cohesive music to begin with. Don't make cohesive transitions. It ain't going to be for me. I'm not the audience for that, but at least it fits artistically. Here, I mean, dude, that, it hits. It hits because nothing else hit like that. And dang, I'm gushing over all the smooth transitions, but I didn't want to leave that one out either. That I thought was very well deserved. And it just absolutely sold that part of the song, but also sold the entire experience of the track for me. And just like all of that. Dude, okay, so I brought this instrument up already. The violin. I don't think it's a coincidence that my two favorite songs have expanded instrumentation, and they're not even like that expanded, right? Track one just happens to have a trumpet for like, I don't know, a seventh of the runtime. It's not even a huge part of it. The violin doesn't show up in this track much often either. But every time they bring in some of this expanded instrumentation, it just works so well. And I wish they would do it more. I don't know if these are guest musicians, session musicians, maybe they're friends that, could only dedicate time to record, a little bit of one song. I don't know what kind of logistical things went into the decisions here. But if they could somehow have infinite resources, I would love for them to explore more of this more often. Not just one special instrument. Throw in two, throw in three. Get that violin in every track. Give us some contrabass in there. I don't care, man. Every time you do it, it's fantastic. I love the writing, and I love the timbre shift too. I think that hearing something as soft as a violin, as a single trumpet, against this massive, disgusting guitar tone is awesome, right? You have that natural contrast there because the thing is, right, your drums are going to be loud and aggressive. They're acoustic, but they're loud and aggressive. They match. The guitars, the bass guitars, I mean, these are all similar-ish, right? The different gauges of the strings on the bass guitar are going to have their own little timbral things, but you're still taking vibrating strings and distorting them. There's a lot of crossover in the tone and timbre of these of the timbre of these instruments. They're doing a great job of creating diversity in tone. All the guitars sound different. The bass sounds different from the other electric guitars. But like I said, at the end of the day, they're all the same family of guitar. They're all are the same family of instrument. how they're making the sound is the same on all of them, and what they're doing to that sound is generally similar too. There's a lot of crossover there. And so when you bring in violin, which is still a vibrating string, but constant vibration rather than a single vibration, and it's clean, it's acoustic. The trumpet is just a totally different tone and timbre in general. They add variety to the album that I think it sorely needs. That's not to say that being completely flat with its tones is a bad thing. It makes up for that with wildly different styles of music throughout. It's not like the album ever gets boring, but I really love the sounds of these smaller, more delicate instruments alongside these gnarly guitars. And I think it really sells this idea of a lowly human trying to fight against the efforts of humanity, if that makes sense. Um, and it's just, it always feels, it sounds good to my ears. Thematically, it seems appropriate. And I find that when they bring these instruments in, they're more prone to lean towards melodic angles, which is a good segue into the next section here. Glacial Gold has a ton of melody to it. I mean, we kick it off with a bit of a lower energy section. We have two guitar melodies going on. One of them is a bit more of an ostinato, a riff. It's a repeated cyclical thing, but it isn't just one bar. It's got some length to it. The other one I think was purely linear. And then we throw the violin on top of that. That has its own linear thing. The vocals come in. I mean, we have multiple layers of melody in an album that melody is kind of sparse on. There is almost no chance that this wasn't going to be my favorite track on the album, given how melody is a secondary thing. Should we have it? Yeah, sometimes. But, texture and atmosphere, cool riffs, that's really going to dominate a majority of the album. That's the core focus of the composition here. Glacial Gold, they put all of their melodic chops into this one, and it shows. There's so many moving lines, so many moving parts. The layers aren't just about creating weights, they're about creating intricacies, and it's just gorgeous from start to finish, even when the weight comes in to contrast those more dexterous melody lines. It's the contrast that sells the story. It's the small versus the big. I'm all over that. I would love a whole album of just Glacial Gold style tracks. I'm appreciative, right, of what they've done on this album so far. It's a series of interesting ideas, and I like how they're keeping things fresh from track to track. But I mean, this one just it clicked all my buttons. Plus, it's doom metal. And like I've mentioned a few times, I think that's the extreme metal genre that tends to resonate with me a bit more than anything else. And of course, I tend to like melodic doom, typically with clean vocals. And that's sort of what we got here. So, like, this is right up my alley. This was destined to be my favorite, at least up to this point. Um, and I think they do one thing that doom metal kind of can fall into a trapping of is being too slow, not being dynamic enough. I know that's part of the shtick of the genre, but I feel like at least here they found a decent pacing to the song. They allowed the song to feel slow and methodical, never really driving towards anything without ever hitting a point of boredom. There's always something new happening, and if they didn't have anything new to throw in, we shifted gears, ramping up the weight, bringing it down into something a bit more softer, ramping it. There's always ways to change up the feeling of the song if we weren't going to change up exactly what a section was doing. And so it felt like it was paced rather well. Doom metal can sometimes make me feel like I'm sitting there waiting for the next thing to happen. And I didn't really get that with this one. So let's hit some lyrics on this, see what's going on. This one's going over my head a little. It says, I stood helplessly by as a mountain of ice slowly crawled over my stick-built life. Those years, much of me died. So we have a colossal, I mean, I guess like an iceberg, right? A mountain of ice. and it's just slowly approaching the narrator. He sees it coming closer every day. There's nothing he can do about it, and eventually it destroys his life, everything he's got. He describes it as a stick-built life. I don't know if that's just for contrast comparison to showcase how small his life is to this glacier, or if it has some other meaning. He says, I sifted through the debris and load-bearing lies that formed the scars several canyons wide. The load-bearing lies I keep coming back to. This feels like it is. This is the crack in the metaphor, right? This is the point when you realize that we're not actually talking about a mountain of ice here. We're talking about people, humanity. Usually, according to this album, those in charge. So, something that everyone could see was coming, and nothing was done about it, and it destroyed everything I own. Being that it is a mountain of ice, my first thought was possibly climate change. However, I'm not entirely sure of that by the end of the song. It says, those years much of me died and was left behind for anyone to find there in the ice. A glacial pace erodes the weight of prior mistakes, grinding fate into gold exposed, shorn from newborn bluffs. Grinds fate into gold. I don't know. Shorn from newborn bluffs would be new mountain ranges created by this block of ice destroying them. So new topographical details, features. Basically, the earth has been changed by this, and we might find gold there. I don't know. Is this about silver lining? Trying to find the good in disasters. It says that duality and despair are usually found in pairs. The end of the song says, when more ice comes aground and streams trail behind, frozen but still alive, dare I be so lucky to find gold exposed behind them all, gold in every tragedy that makes landfall. The only thing I can think of from that perspective would be how often during disasters, whether it is a man-made disaster like, I don't know, maybe an economic recession, or some sort of planetary disaster, a natural one, that some people will find money to be made during these. Oftentimes, with natural disasters, we can see insurance, we can see scams, all sorts of ways for people to make a buck off of those who are the most impacted. But our narrator seems to be the same person who lost their stick-built life at the beginning of this. So if they're looking for gold at the end of a disaster and hoping that they can find gold in every tragedy, I don't see how these two perspectives line up. So again, I'm a bit lost. This is the first metaphor in the album that's gone a little over my head. I can see through the cracks a little bit, but I can't get the perfect picture on what's the other side of this wall. If you have your own interpretation, please let me know, because I really love this song and I'd love to enjoy it even more, understanding what they're singing about. All right, we're going to dive into this next track, Augustus. Sticking with the low energy that Glacial Gold focused on. Interesting melodic choices to put on top of this guitar.
You just a little while longer. We would have sung to you. We would have named you something beautiful, meaningful, powerful.
What? This is an interesting track. It's in stark contrast to everything else on here. We just have a guitar part providing primarily harmonic information. It gives us our chord progressions. It provides the floor for the vocal melody to sit upon and to also be contrasted against. And then we have the vocal melody and the harmonies that it occasionally has. Pretty straightforward song, and I think in many other contexts I would just say, yep, that was something. It was beautiful. Not very deep, but got its point across. But here there's so many unique decisions into harmony, into melody. Oftentimes, what the vocalist is singing doesn't really seem to match up with what the guitarist is playing. The note choices are not dissonant for the most part. Some of the harmonies do come off as very dissonant. I'll touch on that in a second, but there is some intonation stuff going on. I think the notes themselves are fine, just they're not in tune with each other. But the note choices themselves, they're not dissonant, but they're not supportive either. It feels like the person singing is in a different key than the person playing guitar, and they just happen to never play notes that clash at the same time. They're not disruptive, but they're not together either. I don't particularly know how to approach that yet. It pulled me out of the song every single moment. Every new vocal decision, the melody decision in particular, had me asking why. If you just dropped it down a half step or a whole step, you would have had something more natural, I think, feeling. Definitely more traditional, and maybe that was the purpose here, was to create something a bit more experimental in sound and in harmony. But I think it's interesting just how close they were to landing on a more traditional melody for this chord progression. And it's not like they were consistently, way off doing totally different things. No, like they're so close. And they just chose to go in a different direction. I think this is most clearly heard in some of those angelic style vocal harmonies when we had the multiple layers of vocals. The guitar just isn't really a part of any of those chords. It's sort of just doing its own thing. Again, not creating anything disruptive or dissonant, but there's just nothing positive being formed between these two ideas either. It's just two different musical ideas playing simultaneously rather than building off of each other. It's a series of ideas, decisions, I should say, that I don't get. If the purpose is to be obtuse, yeah. I mean, mission accomplished on that one. And it's not like it's bad. It's so different than the expectation. The guitar comes in and I've got a sound in my head. I figure there's only a couple different ways the vocalist can start building melodies off of this, or anyone could start building melodies off of this. And then the vocalist chooses something that's just none of my expectations in a way that it isn't subversive. It's just different. It's unusual. I should have expected this, I suppose. It's not like any of the other four tracks have really been. Well, I mean, Glacial Gold, sure. I think that one was a bit more traditional in its sound, but the other three, they've always done something a little esoteric with their writing, taking a common base and doing taking it in a very different direction. I should have expected something like that here just because of that. And the fact that every song is also different, kind of doing their own thing. This idea of being unique is baked into the album. But I did find that at least on this track it took me out of the experience more than made me interested to hear something new. But I don't think it was entirely just that. There's also the production side on this that I don't think works really well. The vocal productions sound fine when they're by themselves, but there's places where specific syllables are given extra width, extra reverb, extra layering, sometimes just double and triple tracking a specific word. When the harmonies come in, they're all given a ton of reverb. We actually hit some clipping on some stuff there where I feel like some of the natural timbre of some of the higher notes in the chord stack, yeah, they just kind of get buzzy and fuzzy. They lose some characteristic in them. There's a lot of interesting production choices, I think, that don't really match up. The vocals end up outweighing the guitar in a lot of places that don't feel balanced. The song, actually, the general mix of it isn't very balanced. The guitar is left pan, the vocals are center right at times. It's all over the place. It is not meticulously crafted for balance. It's not crafted for palatability. They're just doing their own thing here. And I think that the base foundation, like the notes that are on paper, solid track right here. They they make it eclectic, almost purposefully in ways that I find to be detrimental to my experience with the song. And that doesn't even bring in the concept of intonation. I don't really think the vocalist has been out of tune with much. It's not something that my ear has brought up to my attention at all on this album, but it's impossible to miss here, especially on the vocal harmonies. Several of them have so much warble, which is just when the sound waves themselves aren't lining up nicely, and it creates this sonic distortion in the harmony itself in the chord. You can hear it all over the place here. These notes are not in tune with each other. I think the notes themselves are fine. What's on paper is beautiful chords. We can hear that beauty in here. They're just, the notes aren't played perfectly or as perfectly as a human can play or sing them. And it creates a lot of this intonation warble that, again, I found more distracting than endearing or human or flawed or whatever they were trying to use them to add, whatever texture they were trying to add to the song. It just took me out of the experience every time. Nothing in here made sense to me, and none of it was cohesive enough to create a unique experience of the song that I felt added to anything. Now, maybe I read the lyrics and all this makes perfect sense. I still don't think I'd want to listen to the track again. It's just sonically not interesting to me in the way that it's presented here. But it might be artistically resonant, so let's find out. Well, now I feel a little mean. I still stand behind my opinion that it's not a song I want to revisit because sonically, it's still not for me. But I do think a lot of the division is purposeful. It's a song about presumably a miscarriage. It says, "From the moment we knew that you were here, this family of three became four, and we imagined who you would be, and your mother cheered at the screen when we saw your heart beat. If only we could have known you just a little while longer, we would have sang to you, we would have named you something beautiful, meaningful, and powerful." So, yeah, this idea of not even getting a chance to name this child, that's a miscarriage, most likely, right? Yeah, it's a heavy song about a really disastrous moment in anybody's life. And so I think there is some charming elements to the song that lean into this. It does put a different spin on those angelic vocal stacks at the end of the song for the words beautiful, meaningful, and powerful. I still wish they were a little bit more in tune with each other, but I think, again, the imperfections kind of lean into a sort of sorrow. Why care for perfection when something like this can happen? The heartbreak, the pain, the loss of opportunity. This child didn't even get a chance to take their first breath, much less live a life. What's the point of arguing about perfection in music against that? So, like, I think I get it from an artistic perspective, a thematic perspective, even just a philosophical perspective, I think. And of course, an empathetical one too. Is that a word? I don't know. Empathy for this though. For this person, their family, the situation, the pain that they felt here. Assuming that the lyricist, maybe even the vocalist, lived through this, and this is, a very close incident for them. How do you sing this without breaking down? So yeah, I suppose I've come around to it a little bit, but like I said, I still stand by my observations about the song and how subjectively my ears just don't like it, even if I get it a little better now. Like I said, I do feel kind of bad too. I kind of tore into that song. I guess the only thing we can do is take the next right step. We're going to head into track 6. It's a big downer, man. I mean, this has been a heavy album already. Glacial Gold kind of washed over me. I'm not sure what that one's about, but I mean, the first 3 tracks were heavy lyrically, just not like that. I don't know, something. I think it's just because it's so personal. Everything else is larger than life. How do you combat any of that as a single individual? You can't. But track 5, that is a personal story. Just, I don't know, more weight. Let's move into Wave State. See what's going on here. The push and pull. Trumpet has their line. Guitars are big. Yeah. These 2 guitar lines certainly don't fit the drum work. I like what the guitars are doing together though. I think that's a pretty cool dual guitar line there. I like the guitars don't have the animosity to support the alternating bass and snare like that. They don't have the size. That was a very interesting matching of sounds. So a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The bass kick on one. I mean, bass playing on one of that's cornerstone to waltz. Okay. Totally different time feel, but I like the new atmosphere. I like this legato guitar playing too. Slightly Phrygian? Like, it's not full-on Phrygian mode. The trumpet's in on that too. What? It's interesting to hear the vocals continuing to keep their boosted volume this far into the album. I like the dynamics on the drums here. Such a big section. I wish they would just pick an atmosphere. They've got so many cool ideas, it's just the underlying support is shifting every 8 bars or something. a harmonic shift too. And I suppose that's accurate as well. All 5 of those guitar solo sections, totally different keys that they were in, different emotional resonances. And they're gonna pump it back up. I got 100 seconds to go. Maybe not. Okay. So they're not. I'm going to pause it there. There's still 45 seconds left. That's the transition into the next track. It's got to be. This track, to me, doesn't know what it wants to do at any moment. Actually, I guess it only knows what it wants to do at a moment. I just got done praising Glacial Gold's transitions. None of that's in here, man. There's like one time, I think, where we have a harsh vocal get held out across a harsh transition. And so we kind of move from one idea to another, but there's this connective tissue. It's not a really strong idea. I wouldn't call it a smooth transition, but I think it's like the only smooth one we had in there, the smoothest one. Everything else was just, we were doing that, now we're doing this, now we're doing this, now we're doing that, now we're doing this. And it's just all over the place. I think the individual ideas are fine. I don't think all of them were standout. Some of them had very cool interlinking parts between the different guitars and the bass. Right there at the beginning, right? I commented that, it was an interesting, almost like semi-gazy indie rock harmony with these, big guitars. It was a very interesting combination of tone and composition. But I think the two guitars playing off of each other was fantastic. But underneath that, we had this really fast alternating snare and bass kick that did not match rhythmically with this. It did not match the aggressiveness of this. It did not match the emotion of this. It was just, the drums just doing their own thing. Some parts in this song, super cohesive. There's parts in here where I love what the guitars are doing, where I love how the guitar rhythm is playing around the drum rhythm. But there's just as many sections, even sometimes going on at the same time, where I just don't see how anything's connected at all. Maybe there are instruments that are playing off of each other well, but then there's a third or fourth instrument or the vocals. I'm like, what are you doing? Do you not hear what's going on around you? Don't you want to participate in that? Why do you have to be a loner right now? And there's always just one instrument. And maybe, again, this is thematic, right? A lot of this album is talking about people in general and how we are prone to do what's best for us and ourselves and what's ours at the exclusion and sometimes even the detriment of those around us. I think that this being a part of the album in general, having disparate parts in a song, I mean, even going back to track one, right? I think track four is really the only one that talks about musically a cohesive whole where every bit is designed to support another. And that's a song about, at least metaphorically, a giant glacier just cutting through everything. Multiple glaciers cutting through everything. Um, and so this unification of this monolith, maybe that's what they're going for there. The other tracks have all been about how humans have no problem undercutting another, putting another in a worse spot as long as we can raise ourselves up. It's about the individuality of human existence. And so maybe that's what's going on here too. And so while society might be working together, we have an outcast, a loner, a billionaire, an oligarch, whatever, wanting to do something that's better for him and not for anyone else. But I mean, just dang, it happens so often where I find that I enjoy 70% of a section, and there's just one glaring thing that just doesn't want to line up with anything else. And honestly, artistic perspective, very cool stuff. Right, I dig this consistency. I dig the narrative writing. Right, I listen to your music and I get this story out of it, and that story is probably accurate given the themes of the album. As far as that goes, A plus, fantastic, love it. But as a music listener, not an academic, not a critic, someone who likes to listen to music and has their own taste in things, it is beyond annoying for everything to be in place that creates this beautiful, larger, mechanical, interconnected coolness. And then this one piece that's just janky in the corner that just messing the whole thing up. Right? This is a clock with one broken cog in it. And it is infuriating to find it consistently happen on this track. And so, I get comments, right? They're like, oh, you must be fun at parties, man, just tearing into things. Don't you know how to listen to music for fun? Like, no, this is exactly it, right? I do listen to music in two ways. Sometimes they're completely split. I can love something and hate something simultaneously depending on how I approach it. And that's what's happening here, I think. We haven't got to the lyrics yet, but again, like I said, based on the general themes of the album, I think I'm pretty good in my read on this. They're doing a great job of creating art here, but as far as palatable music that I would enjoy, no. I mean, Glacial Gold, I think, is the only thing I would want to revisit. Edeste, I'd want to give another spin just to see how it works for me on a second listen. But Glacial Gold's the only one that I've just like, I know in my gut, I could listen to that multiple times and be happy with it. There's just so many things that go right in it regarding what I like to listen to. Wave State, I think, is the opposite. It took the chaos and irregularities and Seasons of Salt and ran with it, cranked everything up to 11 and said, catch up with me, I dare ya, because I'm sprinting. And I didn't like the track to begin with. I don't want to sprint on it. It wasn't a fun course to start with. Um, and yeah, that just always having one piece that doesn't work with everything else, I just was not for me. But the other part of this song is that it doesn't know how to stand still ever. I mentioned there we had like 5 back-to-back guitar solos at like 7 minutes in or something like that. generally I felt like they were great. I loved the way that the ideas morphed into each other. I thought that the solos themselves were evocative. They were nice to listen to. They painted pretty pictures. The movement between them, the pacing of it all, I thought was well done. It was more legato style, which is like smoothness of note transition, which we really haven't heard a lot of. A lot of its melody writing in here has been very staccato, very rough, abrasive stops between notes. And this was very fluid and moving. We really only heard a lot of this on Glacial Gold, so it was nice to kind of return to that after a vast majority of staccato melody writing. But like every 8 bars, the underlying music, the foundation that this solo is built on, would just get chucked out the window for a brand new idea, sometimes so disastrously different from where we were that the solo no longer feels like it fits, even though the solo hasn't changed at all. And then the soloist did decide to start using different keys or modes or something. Maybe the chord progressions were changing. I don't know. The emotional resonance of the melodies was being altered every 8 bars or so, and it began to also feel like a collage of its own right. It was becoming difficult to follow along with what the narrative is. It was like someone who tells a story here and they say one word that sends them on a completely different tangent, and something in there sends them on a totally different tangent. And by the end of the conversation, you're talking about something that nobody cares about, but this person is passionately rambling about because somehow he wove his way into talking about it. And like, yeah, none of that made any sense, bro. You word saladed at me, and now you're mad at me that I don't understand what you're doing anymore. And so I'm just sitting here in the guitar solo wondering, how did we get here? Why are we here? What does this have to do with anything else? Some of the ideas are cool, but I can't get invested in it because you're going to change topics in a moment. And that was my experience with this whole song. Mismatched ideas, mismatched connections, mismatched layers, and a penchant for just jumping ship to something totally different at a dime's drop. What is that phrase? A drop of a dime. That's what it is. And I don't know. There's cool moments in here. It's just too frantic. Tick 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 tock for me to really get into. You know, I like a brisk pace. I don't like to sit in things for too long, but I mean, if I can't keep up with what you're doing either, and trust me, like I know I'm one for tangents, right? Y'all, have any of you been to my live streams? I definitely know how to get off topic, but that's off the cuff, man. When you're pre-composing something like this and throwing it out there, I kind of want a little more cohesion. And I was going to use the word expect, but I think that's the wrong word because art should be able to represent whatever it wants. And like I said, there could be a lot of artistic perspective to this that really makes it a solid work of art. But as far as a listenable piece of music, for me personally, with my subjective tastes, I found very little in here that really worked for me and a lot that just kind of upset me. Oh man. It's like what was it, Babadook? Is that what it was called? That word sounds weird. Anyways, there was a film about a single parent and anxiety, and a child that was a bit of a deviant. Just that they didn't act how most kids act societally. And he was just screaming in the back of the car, and she turns around and looks at him and says, "Why can't you just be normal?" And that's what I felt like listening to Wave State here. I just wanted it to calm down for a second and focus on something. But again, there's no artistic reasoning for that. It's just what I would have liked to hear. And art shouldn't cave to anybody's perceptions except the artist, what they want to tell with their art. So I just want to make that clear. I didn't enjoy this, but that doesn't mean it wasn't good. Let's hit some lyrics. So, this song appears to be about an adult and a child sitting on a high point, watching as the world floods. It says, I'll sit at your side, far above the tidal lines, and patiently wait while you learn to count each growing wave. Warming small hands in mine, we watch the land divide, witness monuments to man's ignorance slip beneath the brine. I like this. Looking at the monuments get covered by water. And it's not just any monuments. Monuments to man's ignorance. We could have avoided this, but we continue to build machinery that would hasten it. And now all of that is submerged. It says the high tide will never stop, climbing street by street and brick by block. Crops, culture, civility, and song battered by the waves, swallowed and gone. Just talking about how complete this is. It's not just a rising of the tide, of losing the shoreline. The world is submerged. I warned them not to doubt that we all could still drown during this drought. I love that line. I love it so much. The idea of focusing on a lack of water and ensuring that even that could be something you could drown in. It talks about how eventually there'll be no high ground left, no take to the water, some sort of boat, I presume. It says that they've planned a lifetime for this. And so, says I'll sit at your side and watch shoals swim underneath, leading us to reefs time forgot. Yep. I saw this coming a mile away. Tried to warn y'all. The disaster occurred anyways because y'all didn't reverse decision. I prepared for it. And I think it's interesting. At one point, it says, I'll try my best to explain how we are the mites, we are the mange to be cleansed and washed away. This idea of explaining things, then bringing up crops and culture being swallowed and gone. This idea of being the last remaining human. You get to write history now. It doesn't explicitly state this, but I do think it's kind of leaned into a little bit. And he speaks about how all of this ignorance has been washed away. We can start fresh. And we can find stuff that time has forgotten. I really like that. We can explore the earth as it is, not as people want it to be, not as the rich have perverted it into becoming. Now, what that has to do with the music, dude, I don't know, man. This is a very straightforward, almost calming set of words. The song is rambunctious, constantly jumping all over the place. It's chaotic. It's anxiety filled. So much clashing of ideas there. Many of the other songs, I think that the clashing of ideas tends to work thematically with the lyrics. I don't see it so much here. At best, I could read it as a posthumous display of the schism between those who weren't prepared and continued to damage the earth and the earth's response to that. The calm of the people who were prepared for the flood. Maybe that division could be seen, but I feel like it's just far too often brought up in the music and the constantly changing ideas. I mean, maybe as a metaphor, the song is a constantly changing tide, but lyrically, we're just looking at a rising of the water level or a sinking of the earth, of the land itself. I just don't see a lot of thematic resonance here like I have in a couple of the other tracks. It's kind of bizarre to me. Either I'm completely misreading these and they are consistently thematically relevant to each other, or the band either is fantastic about thematic cohesion or not great at all, and they just bounce between these two extremes. I want to believe it's the first, that I just lack the skill to understand how all these songs connect their musical themes and lyrical themes, because I find it bizarre that a band can create stuff with such cohesion and greatness and then turn around and put something together that feels like the music and lyrics have nothing to do with each other. Uh, but honestly, I wasn't there in the composition parts. I wasn't there in the recording studio. Uh, I don't know what went on with the creation of this, so I don't know if it's them or if it's me. I don't want to put any weight on either since I am unsure. But I do find that, at least with my experience of this album, there's tracks that I absolutely love and can't stop gushing about, and then tracks that I just don't get sonically, intellectually, artistically. And this is one of the latter on that one. Let's wrap this up. We have one more song ahead of us. Let's see what they're going to do to end this album. All right. Last one's called Ossify. Let's dive in. Okay. Call me out like that. I was pretty sure that was going to transition into Ossify. So I guess that would have been the waves covering up everything. Okay, very direct and straightforward. Oh, I like that. That is a cool compliment to this forward driving idea. Oh, that's bounce. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. So lost a little bit of syncopation built around this very core driving drum beat. Oh, I just heard I heard the vocal line back there. Measured with restrains, but still bouncy. Kind of return to the vocal production and harmonies from Water Rights. A nice little indie rock vibe. The, what is that? The theremin sound in the background? I'm kind of digging that. Interesting how much smaller it sounds without this big guitar over here. Okay. Alright, we still have the snare laying down this rigid idea, continuing that on for pretty much the start of the song. That little cymbal fill. All right. This song's been fine where it is, but it feels like we're beginning to build some momentum to push forward. Continuing to widen out the sounds. So we have some tremolo going on. Interesting to hear the vocals get so gnarly. And where are we going with this? No. No. It's just very chill and laid back. Like floating face up in the water. This super fuzzy guitar line is from earlier, right? Oh, that's a rhythmic choice. It's wild how well that works. It really is. The guitar just quits. Hmm. I'm really looking forward. Oh, the microphone's over here. I'm really looking forward to the comments on this one. Primarily because I find this to be a very divisive album. To me, it's a series of ideas. I think some are going to work for some people, some aren't going to work for them. I'm sure there's going to be some people who hate all of it and others who love all of it. But I just find so little through points on here that you kind of have to enjoy it because of its eccentricities. You have to enjoy it because it's as eclectically combined as it is. Because, I mean, this is one of those albums where I can play you a single song from it, and you kind of get a gist for the album, but you still can't have any expectations for anything else on it. I mean, dude, there's even songs where you listen to the first 4 minutes of it, and it still can't set you up for the end of it, and that's exactly what Ossify is for me. I mean, they kind of have a bit more cohesion than tracks like Wave State or Seasons of Salt. but it's not as single-minded as Glacial Gold either. I think the transitions on here are rather fine. I just don't understand how all of this works together. What is it supposed to mean? Why? I don't get it, man. I really don't. I'm listening to this song, and the first section is interesting. I like the rhythmic juxtaposition here. We have that driving bass kick on the bass kick, just quarter notes. But then we have like this cool syncopation stuff from this little like melodic 2-beat riff or something over here, and that's with the texture of just like this guitar making big noise over here. And I thought that section was kind of cool. The drums end up increasing their intensity. We shift over into snare on 2 and 4 and a lot of like tom rolls in order to make it sound like we're building speed. We get different rhythmic ideas on the left guitar over here. I mean, it's just the way that these rhythms are building on top of each other, the vocals coming in and just like belting out these notes. We haven't really heard the vocalist belting much. Higher tones tend to be falsetto as they exist for harmony on top of a more comfortable chest voice that the vocalist likes to use. And dude, I mean, he's just out there hitting these high notes. This is probably the most passionate I've heard the vocalist this entire time. Um, and everything's just like building on itself. I'm like, yes, the album itself is coming to a head. This is fantastic. This is what I wanted. Finally, something that ties things together. And then it just kind of quits. And we have like this indie rock section come in out of nowhere. Well, I think we had like an indie rock harmony chord progression off on the right. But on the left, we had like black metal tremolo picking, or maybe it was 16th note picking. I don't know, just like really fast playing of a single note, changing notes every once in a while. So just like something like that, right? It's about just holding on to a note and playing it as fast as you can while still having some sort of moving overall idea. And then this was contrasted with alternating bass and snare and bass rapidly. And that kind of like felt thrashy to me, like old school thrash. And so like we got black metal, we got thrash metal, we got some sort of indie rock thing going on. It shouldn't work. It has nothing to do with where we came from either. Like that transition was weird, the buildup of this section was weird, but somewhere in the middle of it, I was like, you know what? This works. I don't know why. I don't know how, but I'm enjoying this eclectic combination here. Where are we going to take it? Right? The transition was awkward, but we're still building intensity, right? We're still rising to the peak. I'm on board with this. Might not be exactly what I wanted, but I'm here. Let's do this. Let's hit the peak of this mountain. And then the song just kind of gives up. I think we get a bass guitar lick for a second before bringing in this soft, rounds, bassy guitar tone. Kind of feels optimistic, calming, if nothing else. Any anxiety, tension that this album has reveled in for almost an hour been replaced. I mentioned this section felt like lying on your back in a pool or an ocean in a body of water and just letting your worries drift away, just relaxing in the moment. None of the other instruments that pop up in this section seem to support that at all. The drums come back with a bit of aggression. We get this really big, again, like a black metal kind of guitar tone over here, playing really fast. Just lots of compression, lots of overdrive. And this is playing alongside this calming, soothing guitar lick. The drums come in with something a little bit bouncier, maybe. I want to call it dancey, but it isn't overbearing, really, either. We start to build this up too, and then that pretty guitar on the side just decides to quit playing. Eventually, so does the black metal guitar. Some feedback, static, white noise, drone, they kind of exist until they fade out too. I get this is probably supposed to be the end of the world. It isn't something that happens in a snap. It's something where pieces of society and remnants of people are removed piecemeal. It makes sense to take things away one at a time. That I'm not actually that upset about, and interrupting the song to do so is kind of neat, if that's the direction they're going narratively, but nothing really makes any sense leading up to that. I really felt like if this is the Earth fighting back, things would be a bit more cohesive. We'd continue to have this rising action until it all falls apart. As cliche of a musical concept as that might be, just to have the song fall apart. I like this. Slowly removing pieces. But the build up to it is awkward. Doesn't really make much sense. Maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe the end of the world isn't supposed to make any sense. Maybe it is finding peace within everyone else's confusion. Because the end is near, and humanity is in its dying days. There's nothing to fret about anymore. Finally, destroying the earth has always had consequences. On the horizon, something to worry about today, we can stop it. But at this point, there's no stopping it. There's nothing to worry about anymore. As the first song says, lay down and let her consume you, or something like that. I don't remember what the exact words were, but yeah, it's that feeling of weightlessness. I no longer have the burden of this anymore. We're not trying to stop anything. We can't. It's all set in motion now. Now we just wait. And the relief of having that responsibility taken off your shoulders. I suppose that's what the middle section is supposed to be. Maybe that's what the whole song's supposed to be. The rising intensity is everybody finally realizing it's over. And you, the person who's been warning them for years, you just get to say, I told you so. Kick back, put your arms behind your head, and wait. Eventually it all dissipates. I'm coming around to it, I think. It really depends on what this final song is about lyrically, but if it is something along that line, narratively, I think I can go with that. Even if it isn't, I think that'll still be my interpretation of the music. At least it's the only thing that makes sense to me. More specifically speaking, though, I like the vocals on this one. We had a lot of harsh vocals in here, which I felt matched the intensity of the song. I liked the belting earlier. I enjoyed those more melodic indie rock guitar riffs. The bass got to have a little bit more showcasing in here, and the drums were interesting. I wasn't a big fan of the more rigid patterns that were on display here. I think they fit the atmosphere well, but there were some playful patterns and fills in a couple of places that I kind of enjoyed. We also had the theremin. That I think rounded things out rather nicely, and I think there were some extra layers that we didn't normally have. If I had to guess, I'd probably say we had 4 guitar layers on this track, which is one more than the most I've picked up elsewhere. I don't remember what track was that. Water Rights, when I heard 3 simultaneous guitar tracks. Regardless, there's a point in this song that felt really big, just a wide sound. The theremin helps with that. The 4th guitar line helps with that. It's the biggest I think the album's ever been, and to save that for the ending Makes perfect sense. Let me look at some lyrics on this and I'll wrap up my thoughts on this album. So this is about the end of humanity. In a sense, it's both a pre-exist what is it? When you in existence? No. Extinction, that's the word. Pre-extinction, but also a hypothesis of what things will be like post-extinction. It calls it the cruelty of competition and the catastrophe of capitalism. Basically laying to blame these two things of why humanity destroyed itself. It says that egos and spite offer no advice to those who follow. They will have to surmise. I like that. If you follow an ego, if you follow somebody whose only actions are spiteful, they won't teach you anything, and you'll be left trying to figure out why they do these things when there's nothing really intelligent behind the decisions. There's nothing for you to learn about how they did these things or why they did these things. They did it because they have an ego, because they are spiteful. That's it. The next stanza, I like this. It says, it's hard to fossilize that which has no spine. And the rest of us will be, the rest of us who are composed of bone can leave no record in stone if we're ground to dust. So under a capitalist power, the working class will be ground to dust. We won't have an ability to record what actually happened in our final days. It says, in a world of color, no, in a world the color of rust, whatever follows us will have to theorize all the different ways we may have died. I love that. Because it implies two things. One, that there will be no records of why humanity is no longer around. We're just going to disappear one day, as far as history is concerned. Those of us who would want to make a record of it won't be able to. We'll be at the bottom of the totem, even if we could spend some time away from our corporate overlords. Anything we write will be erased. The people at the top, if they can survive, will be the ones who write the history. So whatever comes after humanity, they'll find some stuff about us. Bones, maybe buried cities. They won't be able to have a defined pattern, a defined history of what led up to this. Just one day, that was it. Humans didn't exist anymore. But I think this is where the real bite happens. In the next 5 lines says how disappointed they'll be when unearthing the truth. I love that term, unearthing, not uncovering, unearthing. The earth will have buried us. It's just, that is the type of wordplay I love. And it says whatever comes after us, when they try to find what's on their planet, just like we went and we found dinosaur bones and stuff, when we've begun to hypothesize and theorize what might have wiped them out, the next thing is going to do the same for us. But it says they'll be disappointed when they unearth the truth as they dig through our plastic cocoons. That's just so good. Even in our final days, we won't be able to escape the plastics. The forever plastics. And that's how it ends. We no longer have a narrator demanding action. Just one with a depressive view of humanity's legacy. post-extinction and saying, this is just the way things are going to be. I'm done. My hands are washed clean of this. I tried. No one listened. Here we are at the extinction point. It'll be a shame when people start digging this stuff up. But that's it. There's no stopping it now. I do think that part of that relief from that indie rock guitar line is a part of this. So where do I sit on this album now that we've finished it? Musically, it's not my cup of tea. There's 2 tracks on it that I like, 1 or 2 that I can stomach, and 2 that I did not enjoy at all. 3 that I didn't enjoy at all, I think, yeah. Because that would have been Wave State, Seasons Assault, and sadly, again, Augustus. I hate ragging on a song lyrically about that, but just musically, not my jam. It's a bit of a mixed bag for me, not something I want to return to, but lyrically, I really enjoy it. And I think from an artistic perspective, I can get behind a lot of this. They do a great job of using a variety of metal and rock sounds as paint and paintbrushes and different types of material to paint on. And I think every one of these songs tells a story. It paints a picture different than the others. None of these songs really do the same thing for me sonically, mentally, visually. They're all so unique. It's part of why I would not return to this album, but I think it's also what creates such an evocative work of art, too. They do a great job at taking all of these inspirations they have and smashing them together into something quite unique, but also quite vivid. At the end of the day, I don't think I've heard an album like this. This type of music created here is khorada. It's sometimes exceptionally cohesive, other times totally disparate. There's even some decisions in here I've tried to look at it from another perspective and can't figure out why anyone would ever have done it. I mean, it's khorada. And I think they've done a great job at putting their mark on the history of music in general, but definitely metal. It's interesting that they didn't stick around then. From what I understand, Agalok and Squid Giant, is that what it was called? I feel bad because I don't remember the name of the other band now. That they're not back together, are they? It says from the dissolution of the groundbreaking underground metal bands Agalok and Giant Squid. That's what it is. A new group is born. So if Agalok nor Giant Squid reformed, is Khôrada still together? Are they still making stuff? I mean, it's been, well, at least 6 years since this album came out. I don't know. I feel like there's nothing out there that's quite like this. And while it's not my cup of tea, it's still a shame to lose a unique voice in modern music. Those are just my thoughts, though. What is this album called? Salt by Khôrada. What do you think of this? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you have your own interpretation of songs, your own opinion on stuff. Maybe you just have some random thoughts. Maybe you want to tell me how wrong I am and how my taste in music sucks. That's fair, I guess, as long as we keep it a little light and understand it's all opinion. Yeah, put all that stuff down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Greatly appreciate all 3 of those. That wraps it up for today. As a reminder, there is another album review today. That's Hungry Lights. I think that's right. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard, 4 p.m. UTC, with a live stream. Come check me out on Twitch, twitch.com/criticalcomposer. Usually chat for like 2 hours, listen to some good music, good company. It's a bit more lighthearted, less analytical than this stuff. And then, of course, Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC. We're going to continue on with next week's theme. All right, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.